Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And today is going to be all about the brain. I have a wonderful guest with me. Her name is Gemma Bailey, and she is currently training to be a neuropsychologist. She is also the director of People Building, a personal and professional development company specializing in NLP training, hypnosis, and coaching. She is the creator and franchisor for NLP for Kids, a company which teaches practitioners how to help children, families, and schools with mild to moderate mental health issues. Gemma is also an international speaker, author, YouTuber, director of a nonprofit called Superheroes, and host of the People Building podcast, which provides an alternative view on psychology. Gemma, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I love the name of this show, by the way. It's so cool.
Thank you. Well, it's loosely based on my background and my, experience as a martial artist, and it just kind of all came together one day. So thank you. I really appreciate that.
That's brilliant.
Thanks. I have to admit, I wasn't the one that came up with it, but that's okay. So Gemma, tell us your story about how you got so interested in neurology, neuroscience, and brain function.
So I think it's probably a multitude of things that came together in a way that I really wasn't expecting. So my what I like to refer to as my previous life. Once upon a time, I used to work as a nursery nurse. So I was working with young children in private daycare settings. And that was how my career started out. And I was fortunate in that I climbed the ranks very quickly. I was a manager by the time I was 24. And the downside of that was then I was left thinking, oh, am I going to do this job for the next 40 years of my working life? And realized that wasn't looking like the way forward. What I loved about that role was watching children develop, understanding their behavior and helping them modify their emotions in order to get what they wanted and needed in life. So I had a real draw towards the psychology side of working with children. And I think it was that then that put me on a journey of studying NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. So NLP, for those that don't know, is a bit like a new age psychotherapy. So it doesn't carry the same level of credibility as something like psychotherapy or CBT. But there's a lot of crossover and there's some similar strategies in there. And I learned NLP, and I also learned hypnotherapy, which is hypnosis, but for therapeutic purposes. And that's really what became my new career, was working in those areas and helping people with issues such as anxiety, phobias, emotional dysregulation, sleep problems, addictions, all sorts of different things. And as you mentioned earlier, I have a company called NLP for Kids. So part of what I ended up doing was sort of going back to my roots with the childcare stuff, taking all of what I'd learned about the behavior and development of children, and actually applying NLP to that and to the issues that children and young people face. So I think in terms of how I then took it from a place of really, broadly speaking, working in psychological services and ramping things up to going, okay, now we're going to start really looking at the brain and the neurological side of things, was the part at which I didn't decide it, life decided it for me. So I have a sister who has severe special needs, and she also has severe epilepsy. So I'd always been around, sort of neurological challenges as an effect of her, being my sister, being in my family. But about 8 years ago, I started to notice that my mum was having some unusual behaviors. And in the beginning, it was stuff that was easy to, maybe brush under the carpet or not pay too much attention to. It was really strange things like clicking her tongue in a certain way, or sometimes we might have a conversation that we'd literally just had a few moments ago. Sometimes she was making some bizarre decisions, and sometimes she would do all the right things, but do them in the wrong order, so like sequencing was sort of going out of sync. And it was very difficult to pinpoint what was going on because she'd just retired. And so she was maybe a bit bored and, kind of looking for things to do. So perhaps causing a bit of mischief, you might say, as well. But as a result of speaking to other people in my family about it, I realized that they were becoming quite stressed at the pressure that she was maybe putting on them at times, and just how dysfunctional her emotions were becoming. So I took her off to the doctors as a matter of course, just to kind of, let's check in and see if there's something going on. Sometimes for people, they might have something like a bladder infection, and it can really affect their neurology. So we wanted to rule those sorts of things out. However, by the time we had got to the GP, I'd started to do a little bit of research, and I was really looking into, okay, if we take all of these weird and bizarre symptoms that she has and throw them all into Google, because that's how you do research when you're not a medic. So you throw them all into Google, what comes out? And what I was consistently seeing was this rare brain disease called FTD. And there's a couple of different variations of FTD. And the one that seemed to make the most sense for what my mum was demonstrating was BV-FTD, which is a behavioral variant frontal temporal dementia. So it's a rare early onset dementia. My mum at this time was in her 50s. So the idea of it being any kind of dementia had never even crossed my mind. So we ended up going to see the GP, and when you say to your regular physician, I have a suspicion around dementia, they typically, because this is what they typically come across, will think of something like Alzheimer's or something that involves memory dysfunction. And so she was put through a standard test that the GP would do, where they ask you questions such as what year is it, and who's the prime minister at the moment, and all of these, questions that would flag up if someone's having some kind of memory issues. Well, of course, she aced it. She knew who the prime minister was. She knew what year it was. So there was nothing to demonstrate that there was any kind of dementia going on. And with some persuasion, the doctor referred us on to a psychiatrist. Now, all of this, because we're in the UK, we're working with the National Health Service, which the good thing is that, we're not paying for the care and treatment that we receive here. The downside is that you have long waits before you get seen by the right people. So we eventually got to meet with a psychiatrist about, maybe 5 months later. And she went in with the psychiatrist and had a session. And then I went in at the end to see how things had gone. And the psychiatrist said, there is nothing wrong with your mother. She has retired, so she's just showing up in your life a bit more. And it would seem that maybe the frustration is coming from you and that your mum is absolutely fine.
Whoa.
So I went from being the person who was concerned about someone else to having someone else concerned about me and my mental well-being, which was quite a shock to the system, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Yeah. Even I'm reeling and I'm just listening to it.
Yes. So the psychiatrist was so certain that there was no problem whatsoever. She really wanted to close down the case. And I refused to leave the room until she had agreed that we could have a brain scan. So at that point, knowing what I knew by then, I wanted an MRI. MRIs are very expensive. So I negotiated, and I was negotiated down to a CT scan. So again, a few months later, we went for the CT scan. The CT scan results then go to a radiographer. The radiographer, if they see anything that looks a bit iffy, would then pass it back to the psychiatrist. However, in that time, the psychiatrist, in all of her confidence that nothing was wrong, had actually closed down the case. So there was nowhere for the scan results to go to. And the radiographer had realized there are gaps in this brain that should not be there. And somebody really needs to do something about this.
Can I just ask one question? One question really quickly, because I'm really wondering, with the months that you had to wait before you saw the psychiatrist, and then the additional months that you had to wait before you got your CT scan, was your mother deteriorating during that time? Because I would imagine there would have been definite changes. Okay, so sorry about that.
100%. No, that's fine. So one of the things that I was later credited for by one of the neurologists that we ended up working with was that I was a very accurate historian, because with all of these changes happening, I was keeping details, I was logging everything, because I knew it was all important and relevant. So the CT scan actually ended up getting sent back to her GP. So GP, is your regular physician. It's a general practitioner. They're not someone who is trained to look specifically at brain scans and identify what's going on there. So we ended up back with the GP, and he said, I can see that there's a problem. The radiographer has said that there are these CF spaces that shouldn't be there. But I don't know what this means, so I'm going to refer you to neurology. And that was, again, another 4 or 5 months before we got to see the neurologist. And so by that time, I'd found out who the neurologist was going to be, and I'd basically written him a biography of everything that had happened in that time, so that he had the kind of up-to-date information before we got there. And because it then is such a rare brain disease, even though by this stage I knew exactly what I was talking about when I went in, and I said, it's this. I think this is what we need to be looking at. For him, it was so unusual to come across one of these cases that he wanted to refer us for a second opinion to a different neurologist at another hospital. So 4 or 5 months later, we ended up seeing a second neurologist, where all of the appropriate tests were then done at the Royal Free Hospital in London, which is a very prestigious hospital here in the UK. And as a result of that, they said it is likely that she has BVFTD. But they were not able to conclusively say at that point, because it was early days, and it kind of could have fallen into a few other camps. It could have also been motor neurone disease. It could have also been something else. So it was really a case of, let's see how it progresses, and then we'll be able to, firmly stick a label on it. And so, a long story short, that's what prompted me then to kind of kick back afterwards and say, I appear to have inadvertently learned an awful lot about the brain and about neurology and about, neurological deterioration. What am I going to do with this now that I know it? And it just also so happened that all around the same period of time, I had one of my clients said that their parent was experiencing a low confidence issue. And so they had recommended that they came to see me, potentially for some hypnotherapy. And so this lady came with the low confidence and her husband, and they came in for a consultation session. And as I was running through my consultation questions, and I was asking her about the different evidences that she had that showed to her that her confidence levels had changed. And she was telling me things like, actually, it was really the husband was telling me things like she started hoarding, that she's disengaging with her family, that her emotions are sometimes very high, sometimes very low. She's disengaged with work. She can't really be relied on to drive safely anymore. And I started thinking, this is all sounding a bit too familiar. So I said, okay, first step is you're going to go to your GP. You're going to have a check to see if there's a urine infection. Sometimes that can and then the husband said to me, what else could it be? And I said, I think it could be neurological. Now, what I didn't say to them is, I think that she has an early onset dementia, because I'm not in a position to be able to make that call, or certainly to, you know, I don't want to scare anyone by them thinking that I'm making some sort of diagnosis. And a couple of months later, I received a message from the husband, and it just said, how did you know?
Wow.
And she was diagnosed with an early onset dementia, which had been caused by sleep apnea. So when she was sleeping at night, she wasn't getting enough oxygen in, and the lack of oxygen had caused the deterioration to start in her brain. And that was just one of around 4 or 5 people that cropped up in my life after all of the journey with my mum had started, where I was able to redirect them towards the right services, because I realized there is some kind of neurological issue happening with this person.
Wow, what a story. First of all, I just have to say, because this is very important, and I want to highlight this for the audience, you are an amazing patient advocate for your mom.
Oh, thank you so much.
I mean, that really says a lot. It's so important to have somebody, you know, even if you're not in cognitive decline or, you know, have any dementia, a lot of times when you are going through something medical, it's so important to have somebody, another set of ears and another mouthpiece for you to be able to support you and speak for you. Because if you had listened to, if you weren't the type of person that I think you are, and you just said, okay, when you did that first consultant that, you know, oh, it's not my mom, she's absolutely fine, it's me, I'm the one that has the problem. You know, if you had just accepted that, what would have happened from there with your mother?
I know. Yeah.
And the other question,
it would have got messy, and it would have got dangerous.
Oh, absolutely.
It would have got dangerous very quickly. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then what was the time frame from the moment you decided we need to research this and took her to the doctor for the first time until you finally got everything done back to the general practitioner and then to the neurologist? All those months that passed totaled, how much time was that went by?
It was just over a year. So we kind of started the journey in the February, and I think we eventually received a letter saying it's likely BVFTD around May, June time of the following year.
Did you ever get frustrated? I mean, I'm sure you were. I mean, that's putting it mildly.
Yeah. It was so hard. It was so hard because I was frustrated that things weren't moving forward fast enough. I was frustrated that I really believed I've got the diagnosis. I know what it is. And I still had to sort of sit back and wait for someone else to go, yeah, you're right. And it took over a year for that to happen. So that was very frustrating. It was also, the challenges were made harder by what I didn't know had happened at the time. I didn't find this out until probably close to when she passed away a year ago. So I had this kind of, thank you. Yes, I had about an 8-year period of really feeling like I'm fighting this battle on my own and exhausting myself doing it. What I didn't know, and I found out toward the end, was that because it had been such a rare disease, we had been referred for a second opinion to the Royal Free Hospital in London. But as a result of us going to London, it didn't trigger the usual support that would come in place from our local authority services. And usually when a family has a family member, you know, with Alzheimer's, with dementia, or really anything else, there are going to be social workers that become involved, nursing people that, you know, perhaps visit the premises to see if it's safe. And none of that stuff happened. So when we reached a point where she was, you know, not switching off the oven or the lights or locking herself out, it was me that was going, okay, what safeguards do we need here? And when it came to she can't live by herself anymore, it was me that went, right, where are all the care homes and which one's going to be the right one for her? And so I really felt like I'd kind of gone through all of this like completely on my own. And it turned out that I had, because we'd just not got put into the system that we were supposed to have been put into. And I didn't realize that until it came to the part where we needed hospice involvement. So the hospice nurses were involved, and it was only then that it was flagged up that no, actually you should have had support throughout all of this. So yeah, it was super frustrating.
Well, it's nice to at least have had that validation at the end, but a
Yes.
little too late for that to help you out. Now, during this time, were you taking care of your sister as well?
So with my sister, what happened was, so my sister was already living in residential care, and my mum was or had been responsible for my sister's finances. So working as her sort of financial power of attorney. When things changed very rapidly with my mum, I became my mum's power of attorney for her finances. I became my mum's power of attorney for health and well-being. I became my sister's power of attorney for finances. My sister's care home was inspected and deemed not to be safe. So I had to find her a new care home.
Jeez.
I was selling my house so that I could, and clearing out my mum's house so that I could sell it and pay for my mum to go into care. And there was more than one point, but there was one specific day I remember where my sister's epilepsy had really gone out of control, partly due to the changes in her living circumstances. It really sort of thrown her off emotionally. And so her seizures became quite dangerous and she was hospitalized. My mum simultaneously had a bad fall, bladder infection, and was hospitalized. I had both of them in the same hospital, in the same building, on different floors. So yeah, it was hectic.
Oh, you're so sweet. The way it was hectic. I mean, it sounds like an absolute nightmare. Yeah. Now, during this time, did you have any support or any help, either, emotionally, physically, psychologically, even just, maybe a group of friends who would come over and bring a bottle of wine and just all, cry together? I mean, how did you get through it?
I think that I'm very fortunate in that I'm super resilient anyway. And I'd sort of grown up in a family of dysfunction. So there were some aspects of this that didn't faze me too much. Secondly, I do have some very good friends who've been, super supportive and been, good listening ear. And on my dad's side of the family, they were also really very good at just letting me offload and have a moan and a whinge about things. So I was very fortunate in that respect. The other thing, though, I would say that really kept me tethered and kept me going in the right direction is that I do have multiple businesses, and there were other things I needed to make sure happened. I needed to make sure that my staff got paid, and I needed to make sure that the empire stayed afloat. And in the last, sort of the tail end of my mum's life, I also started my master's. So I was studying, and on one hand, you could say that's crazy, what a time to think about doing something like that. But it gave me an awful lot of structure. And it also meant that I wasn't kind of sitting around waiting for the end of my mum's life to happen,
Right.
which, you know, was inevitably coming. And I was getting calls from the home every couple of weeks saying, we think it's going to be now. That went
Mm-hmm.
on for actually a couple of years,
Oh.
because nobody knew, because again, it's a very rare disease. Nobody actually knew what the end looked like in this case. And so there were so many times when it looked like the end is now, and then it wasn't. And
Mm-hmm.
so I really needed to make sure that I just had stuff in my life that kept me grounded, kept me
Mm-hmm.
focused, so that I wasn't, you know, I didn't really have too much time to just sit and ruminate on everything that
Right.
was happening on an
Right.
emotional level.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I just want to segue for a moment here, because both of my parents passed away in 2010, just 19 days apart. And they were
Oh
both,
gosh.
they both had end stage leukemia. It was the most bizarre thing ever. And of course, they lived, well, I moved out to Denver right after graduating college. I'm from Pennsylvania. So I spent that entire year flying back and forth to help them out. But they always had their cognitive, abilities. They were as sharp
Yeah.
as could be, and they were really able to speak for themselves, but they did need a little bit of help. But I have 4 sisters, and so it wasn't just me on my own. And the way we're juggling 2, sick parents, dying parents, and actually one of my sisters had 2 little kids. She was newly divorced, and these 2 little kids, I mean, I said, when this is all over, we need to just go into juggling because we're getting so good at it. But at least we had that support. And during that time, I told you before we started recording, I do something called Feldenkrais, and I was just completing my 4-year Feldenkrais training. And that was the one thing that really helped keep me grounded. Otherwise, I don't know if I would have made it with all of my faculties still intact.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. No, I think it's easy to assume that in times of crisis, you should kind of clear the diary and just focus on that thing. But you know, the reality is that you need life to go on, because the
Mhm,
crisis will come to an end, and you don't want to be
mhm,
left then it kind of going, who am I now that I'm not dealing with this crisis, you know,
right.
because all of my identity went into that.
Mhm,
And so I was really conscious of it, because it was so all consuming. And
mhm,
you know, I would get calls when I was at work, I would get calls in the night, I would get calls if I was away. So it felt like I could easily get sucked into, my whole life revolves around this. And
mhm,
actually, you know, I knew it would inevitably end, and I didn't want to be kind of left going, well, who am I now after
right.
that end came to pass.
Yeah. Well, that was another, stroke of brilliance on your part. It seems like everything you do, you make some really awesome decisions in your life. I mean, were you always like that?
Probably not.
That's a
um,
really honest answer.
you know, you live and learn.
Mhm,
I think that being a business owner certainly put an awful lot of responsibility on my shoulders.
mhm,
And and I think that I've just learned so much from being in that position.
mhm,
When I compare who I was and how I was back when I was an employee to who I was and how I am now, um, I just think I take so much more responsibility
mhm,
just as part of my general character now than I ever would have done back then. So
mhm.
I think it definitely sort of changed something in my character becoming a business owner.
I wonder also too if what you went through with your mom and your sister is that really impacted. I mean, you seem like a very empathetic person anyway, but did that change the way that you looked at life and the way you dealt with your clients? Just that extra little level of being able to relate, the relatability and the empathy.
I think so, in that there's not a lot of problems that I hear about that I can't relate to in some way. You know, life
Mhm,
has given me a lot of experience. And
mhm,
so um and fortunately I've got through those experiences, so I've also developed some quite practical strategies to be able to share with other people, and certainly having NLP as one of my skill sets helps with that too, because I can really give people step-by-step strategies that they can follow. I think too that going through some very tough stuff in life, whilst it's horrendous at the time, and you'll know this too, it does give you perspective on a lot of other things that either you or the people around you or even clients might be experiencing. And whilst it's generally not a favorable thing to make comparisons, actually negative comparisons can be quite humbling. On my own podcast, I interviewed a lady a couple of months back called Sarah Im, who was a survivor of the killing fields. Yes,
I interviewed her as well. Lovely lady.
She's amazing, right?
I love her.
And after I'd had that conversation with her, I just thought, well, Bailey, you have no excuse to ever moan about anything in life ever again. Because the experience she went through was just like, it blew my mind that she went through all of that, came out the other side, and is just still such a humble, lovely, genuinely sweet person. And and so having that comparison in a way for me made me go, yeah, I've not really had it that bad. That would have been a lot worse. So you can use experience in that way.
One thing I do want to add about Sarah and her story is I mean, such an awful story, but she told it with so much grace. And she also has an incredible sense of humor. So
it really does.
Through all of those horrible things that she went through, and she still has that amazing sense of humor. And I loved when she told the story that, her family thought she was dead. And here she finally walked down the street to the house, and they had already thrown away all of her clothes because they thought she was dead 3 years earlier. So, it's an amazing story. So, and then that's really an interesting, perspective when you can always find somebody who's had it much worse than you. And it does help to put things in perspective.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I remember her saying that her mum didn't recognize her because she'd got so skinny. But one thing that her mum saw that made her think, oh, it's Sarah, was her forehead. Things.
I forgot that part. Yes.
Yeah, so funny.
So for the audience, definitely check out this woman, Sarah. Im is how you say it. So it's Sarah, S-A-R-A. Last name is I-M. Go to Gemma's podcast and you will be able to hear her there. You can go to the FemiNinja Project podcast. I can't remember what episode it is. I think it's, like 180 something or 190. It's probably 190 something. So anyway, but Sarah's an amazing woman and very inspirational, as are you, Gemma. I can't believe this. So when you said, at the end of all of this, when things are really falling apart and you're holding yourself and everything else together, you decide to get your master's degree. Was that when you started studying the neuropsychology?
It was, yes. So I actually took a course in neuropsychology first, and partly because I think I wanted to see if I could study because it had been a while, so I did a course just to kind of see, all right, can I get my head back in a book? Can I focus? Can I still take tests? Can I still pass the test? And fortunately, I aced it and I did really well, and I really, really enjoyed it. And so then I was thinking, okay, I really want to do something else with this. Now, being me, it was not going to be a straightforward journey, as we probably know. So I started thinking, okay, if I wanted to be a neuropsychologist, take what I've learned here, take the experience that I've had, plus the fact that I'm already working in psychological services, blend all of that together. What are my first steps going to be? I was kind of doing my research. Now, I am not from an academic background. There are not academic people in my family. When I became a nursery nurse, it was a college course, which is different to what college means in America. It's more just like a sort of higher education. And I'd done a 2-year college course, which gave me the qualification of being a nursery nurse. Now, back when I did it, at that time, that course carried some university points, so that if I'd wanted to go to university, I could have done so. What I found out was that my course has since been discontinued and doesn't exist anymore. It was superseded by a different qualification, and therefore all of my university points have gone. And I found this out at the point that I was thinking, you know what, I think I'd like to become a neuropsychologist. And suddenly I have 0 credit when it comes to education. So that was obviously quite disappointing. I was really looking around going, okay, is there any other way for me to be able to get onto either a kind of gateway course, or perhaps get myself onto some kind of academic journey here? Like, where do I go from here if I'm still going to pursue this? And so I spoke to one of the university boards, and they said, you're a mature student, you have got experience already in psychology because of the businesses that you're running, you have added value to the field by creating a new methodology with NLP for kids, and you've written books about it, so there is some, there's some weight to that already. So I started looking then into what courses around psychology would fit for me from the perspective of, okay, my mum's still around, so I can't just be jetting off to a university somewhere. I've still got businesses to run. I can't really be taking time out during the day. So I needed an online part-time course that I would be able to work through a little bit more at my leisure. And I found a couple, and I made a couple of applications, and one of the universities got back in touch with me and eventually said, we would like to offer you a place. So I was like, this is amazing. Of course, I would like to take it. What I didn't know at the time was that the course I'd actually just agreed to take was a master's conversion course, which implies that not only do I already have a bachelor's, but I already have a master's, and I'm just converting what I've already got into another master's in psychology. None of which is true. I do not have a bachelor's, and I do not have a master's. So I kind of went back to them and went, are you sure about this? And they said, yeah, we've looked at everything that you've done and everything that you've contributed to the field of NLP already, and you've got a place. And so, yeah, that was what got that journey started. So,
oh my goodness, that's incredible. And finally something has gone your way.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. So, it's the funniest thing, because the friends and family that sort of know my non-academic background, and they just say, how did you talk yourself onto that course?
And you said you didn't. They just decided for you. You didn't have to do anything, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty
I think
funny.
they think I bribed somebody to get there.
Yeah, right. Oh God, that's too funny. So how far along are you in the program?
So I am now applying for my doctorate, which,
Congrats.
So thank you very much. So it's all kind of fingers crossed at this stage. And I've got my references lined up for that already. So yeah, it's a little bit watch this space at the moment. We're just in that strange limbo bit where we find out what's going to happen next.
Yeah. Wow. Well, good luck. And I know it's going to turn out absolutely great. And do let me know. Keep us posted.
Thank you. Yeah, I will, definitely.
Okay, so there's something else I'm really, really curious about. And I think maybe these two subjects or these two might tie in together kind of. Okay. And one of them is why positive thinking doesn't work. And the other one is what annoys you about the self-development industry. I already have my own thoughts about it, which have been pretty much solidified after talking to you. But I want to know why positive thinking doesn't work. And then you can tell us why the self-development industry annoys you.
Okay, so the reason why positive thinking doesn't work is because if you have let's say some unwanted thoughts or even a negative thought in your voice which is persistent and is bullying you, is really you're being unpleasant towards yourself, you're hitting yourself over the head with a big stick, typically that internal self-talk has got some power to it. If you're telling yourself things like you're useless, you're never going to be able to do this, you're a failure, that voice isn't uncertain. Unfortunately, that voice typically sounds like it's got some power behind it, and that it knows what it's talking about. So if you want to combat that, going at it with just positive thinking and telling yourself, I'm a wonderful, worthwhile person, aren't I great? It's just not going to be enough. Sometimes we need to tell ourselves to shut the fudge up, and that we need to really go back at those negative internal voices or those negative frames with more power than that thing had. You can't just be fluffy and, oh, aren't I lovely? There's only so far that what we in the UK would call tea and sympathy. You have a cup of tea and you go, tell me all about it. There's only so far that that's going to take you. Sometimes you need to fight fire with fire. So I think one of the downsides of just purely thinking positively is it can be way too wishy-washy. And that what we want when we are positively coaching ourselves, when we are telling ourselves good things, do that with the same level of power and fire and confidence and the same intonation that you would use if you were saying bad things about yourself. It's not enough to go, I'm a great person. You have to be like, I'm a great person. Like, I'm really good at this, and really put some welly into it so that it's got at least the same degree of strength as any of that bad stuff that you might have ever thought to yourself or told yourself.
Nice. I love that. I really love that. Okay. So then, and I think this does kind of segue into the next question that I had about the self-development industry and what annoys you about it.
So many things, but
we have all day.
Yeah, good. There's a few things. One thing I will say now that obviously I'm dancing in a more academic world, the thing that I appreciate most about that is, where is the proof? Show me the numbers. And I think that that's something that we definitely lack in the self-development world. We typically measure the effectiveness of what we are doing on how someone is feeling. And that's great, but it's not always the best measure to use, because someone can leave a session and say you're a really lovely person, and so they feel good about you, but have they changed? Has their bad habit gone away? Has their phobia been cured? It feels like sometimes in self-development we're so busy being polite we forget to ask the right questions around, are we actually making an effective, tangible, provable difference in what we're doing? The other downside with it is that very often certainly within NLP, which is the modality that I use the most, one of the key principles, which is important but makes it very difficult to measure, is how flexibly we work. We're not following necessarily the same steps with every person every single time. So it makes it difficult to prove that your interventions are effective. Because if you work with one person and it's not quite working for them, you might say, oh, well, let's just switch it up and do things in a different way, because we're flexible, and that's great. But then it means that we're not doing the same intervention anymore. So we can't measure it in the same way to see if it worked when we worked with our previous client. And again, it takes away from the validity of these interventions that we're using, because we're unable to prove that what we're doing is working. And so I guess in summary of all of that, I would say that what self-development is typically not great at is providing evidence. Where is the proof that what we're doing is working? And where is the proof that when we use it consistently, that it does work? So yeah, those are just some of my thoughts about where we go wrong in self-development.
Because it's all subjective.
Exactly.
It's not measurable.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay,
and
so,
it definitely has a place. Don't get me wrong. It's what I do for a living. So of course I believe that there is immense value in it. It just makes it too fluffy. It's too fluffy to really show that there is proof in the pudding.
I think you said it very well when you said something about you just have to hit yourself over the head with a stick. And sometimes that is what it takes to get your subconscious to change, or to get your attention at a much deeper level.
Yes. Yeah. And typically the stick that we're using is one that's bashing us with negative thoughts rather than the useful ones.
Right.
There's a difference between thinking positively and thinking in a useful way. And so I'm more of an advocate around, well, what would be useful for you right now? Because maybe it's not, you're going to be fine, because that might actually be a lie. Maybe something that's more useful to say to yourself right now is, if I'm not fine, it's okay, because I know how to deal with that. That's a more useful thing to think, and it's probably more realistic.
And it has a little bit of an action, like a call to action in it too, rather than just leaving it hanging there.
Yeah, like the universe will make sure I'm okay.
Hasn't done so well so far, but hope does spring eternal. Okay, so the other thing, tell us about people building.
So People Building was my first company that I set up, and initially started out as an NLP and hypnotherapy training school, because as well as using those methodologies, I also teach them as well to an accredited standard. So started out helping other people to become qualified practitioners, either because they wanted to be coaches, or because they were maybe going to be using those skills in a role that they already fulfilled, such as in leadership and management. One of the things that started to happen when I began seeing clients myself was lots of the people that I had been on training with were coming to me, because there's a lot of people that go through different sorts of self-development training with a goal of monetizing it, of having their own coaching practice. And then that doesn't happen. Real life kicks back in, and they realize, no, I need to pay the bills this month, I'm going to have to go back to my job. And I was fortunate that I was working as a nanny, which gave me free time in the day, so that I was able to work on my business while simultaneously still earning a salary. And I was very driven, so I would work in the evenings, I would work at the weekends, which perhaps people with families may have found more challenging to do. So I was seeing clients, and what I started to notice was that the people that previously trained with me on the same courses as me were saying, oh, Gemma, I've got someone to come and see me for a quit smoking session, and I wondered if you might have a hypnosis script that I could use. And so I'd been, seeing clients, so I was writing scripts for the clients that I would work with. And then I would say to the people, that came to me, yeah, of course, like, here's a script that I've written, feel free to use that. And then they would work with their client, and they would get paid by their client. but I'd written the session for them. So it didn't take very long before the business brain kicked in and went, hang on a minute. This is very nice. You're being, doing a lovely service for other people here, but actually this doesn't make sense. So all of the scripts that I'd written, I converted into PDF documents and began selling them off of my website. Nice. So that when other therapists came to me and said, oh, have you got something for weight loss? I'd go, yes, it's £6.99, please. And I would sell it to them instead. And then all of my scripts I recorded into audio format. And the audios I started to sell on iTunes. So I can legitimately say I've got over 70 albums on iTunes, just fortunately isn't me singing. And all of the scripts were then collated and put into a book. And so all of this was kind of happening under the people building umbrella. The exciting thing that's happened with people building recently is that I have franchised that company, because I realized that the people that would come on training with me, just like the ones I trained with, would have these grand ambitions about becoming coaches, would do the training, and then real life would kick back in. And the reality is that, learning how to be a good coach doesn't make you a good business owner. And it doesn't mean that you've got marketing skills or, any of those other things that you need. So I wanted to put something in place that would give them all of those resources as well on the other side, with complete ongoing support, so that they don't just get their coaching qualification, but they actually have a model that they follow to set up their business and to start bringing clients in, so that they begin to earn their money back and, clear off whatever the cost of their training was to begin with. So that's one of the key things that people building is doing right now. And the other big one is the podcast. So the people building podcast actually started up like way back when.
Could you try again?
Siri thinks I'm talking to him and I'm not. So the people building podcast started up when iTunes was brand new. And it was in the top 10 of the alternative health download chart for the 5 years that I ran it for. And then I took a break. And then I came back and I restarted the podcast probably about 2 or 3 years ago now. And it also went into video format, because by then YouTube existed as well. And I've recently started up a new podcast series called Extraordinary People, where I speak to people that have had very challenging circumstances in their lives, and not just lived to tell the tale, but survived and then thrived beyond that.
So
it's a very.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's a very humbling show to do, because whilst I've had all of the experiences I've told you about today, I actually get to speak to other people that make me go, wow.
Right. So you actually started the podcast initially, I think it was 2005, was it?
It could well have been way back then. Yeah,
it was because I when I was reading that on your profile, I thought, wow, I didn't even know podcasts existed back then.
Yeah, it was it was a different animal back then, because nobody really knew what podcasts were. It's so funny, I remember saying to people, in conversations, I would sort of say, have you heard of a podcast? And now it just seems ridiculous that people wouldn't know what that is.
Well, actually, I started this podcast in 2018, and I didn't know what a podcast was. I didn't know why I would possibly want one. I know people had told me I should look into it, and there's a long backstory to it. So I was dragged into the podcasting world reluctantly, but it turned out pretty well.
Yeah, thank goodness you were.
Yes. Okay, so now tell us about your books, because I think that the people building, would that be your first book? I'm not sure about what other books you've written.
Yeah, so my first book is Creating Trance and Hypnosis Scripts. So it is a book of hypnotherapy scripts for other therapists to use, and it also gives them some models to follow to be able to start creating and designing their own as well.
Okay.
And I think that book came out in around 2007, 2008. So it's been around for quite a long time now. My second book was an NLP for kids based book. So NLP for Kids is probably my busier company. It's a bigger franchise. And, you know, there's a lot of challenges around children's mental health, probably throughout the Western world, if we're being completely honest. So that one's, you know, really kept me very, very busy, but it didn't have its own book. So I wrote a book called Stop Anxiety and Grow Confidence. And that one's, I don't know when that came out, actually, maybe like 2018, maybe, yeah, somewhere around there. That one I self-publish rather than doing it through a publisher, and so it's available on Amazon, and it's really a guide for parents and professionals who are interacting with anxious young people, giving them different strategies to use, different models to follow, and also some work to do on themselves, because it's easy to unknowingly and unconsciously hold someone in an anxious space because of how you are interacting with them and around them. And sometimes the only change that's needed is not with the anxious person, but with the people that are engaging with them and how they're doing that.
Again, I think that's another stroke of brilliance and something that is desperately needed, especially these days. There is so much anxiety and stress and mental health disorders and dysfunction. I think a lot of it brought on by the pandemic the past 2 years. When you talk about it's NLP for kids, what is the age group then that this can apply to? Just so the audience knows, if they want to get this book to get some really helpful tools that they can, you know, work with their own children or grandchildren or whatever. What is the age group?
So typically when we're working with children in one-to-one sessions, so actually sort of working with them therapeutically, we typically aim for 7 years and upwards. That being said, we also, for the elements that apply to parents and teachers and for them to be doing the work rather than for it to be applied directly to the child, 5 years and upwards is absolutely fine as well. I say that mainly from the level of comprehension that a 5-year-old would have in relation to some of the strategies that we might be using. But, you know, parents and professionals that work with children are massive influencers. So if they have their own psychology straight and they are interacting and reacting in the right way, it can make the world of difference from a very, very young age.
So, Gemma, with all of this that you're doing and that you have done, where are you going from here? I mean, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Do you know what?
And, you know, I never asked that question, but for some reason, just, you know, listening to your story and following along, you know, chronologically, I was like, this is amazing. I mean, I'm thinking like in 5 years that you might be ruling the world, and I kind of hope that you do.
Well, you know that our Prime Minister just resigned today, so
yes, I did. Okay, and going back, even when you said that they were asking your mom all these questions, you know, who's the Prime Minister, and I'm going, I don't know if anybody could really answer that right about now. So
that one today. I mean, I think for me, I never really have. It sounds terrible. I never really have a plan. I just have an idea, and I have maybe a wish list, but I would never refer to it as a goal, which doesn't sound like a very NLP thing to say, but I feel that for a 5-year period, the word goal is very concrete. And I remember speaking to a potential franchisee who asked me this exact question. And he said, where do you think you'll be in 5 years' time? And I said, I can tell you where I'll be next year, ideally. I can tell you what I want in 5 years' time. I cannot tell you where I will be because I have to keep my eyes open and my mind open to all of the things that might come my way that I was not expecting. And when I think back on that conversation now, I was like, that was really wise, because I did not know, everything that was going to happen with my mum would happen. I did not know that COVID was going to happen and that I would be furloughing my entire staff team for 6 months, and I just kind of think, wow, what would it have done to my brain if I'd had really fixed ideas about where I was going? So in terms of what I would like to have happen in 5 years' time, I would like to be in a position where my companies are really self-sufficient, and that I get to do just the bits that I really like, but that, all of the automation and the right foundations are in place for it to be successful for the people who come on board, and for everyone to be able to work in a relaxed and easy way. I would like by that point to have completed all of the education that I'm putting myself through at the moment, and to I would like to be working with clients in a slightly different way, whereby I'm helping them on a higher level than I can right now. Because right now I'm in a situation where I can see and oftentimes know what the issue is. But because of the status I have at the moment, I have to keep my lips locked and avoid saying things like, this child has ADHD, even though I'm watching them going, this child really does have ADHD. And instead I'm sort of going, you ever considered perhaps doing some kind of evaluation, I don't know, maybe around ADHD or something? I would like to be in a position where I can, more concretely put my stamp on the things that I know that are going on, which I can't do just yet. So yeah, and really just to I like the feeling that I get when I know that I've really helped people to either make a difference or get on the right path. Because sometimes it's not me that ultimately helps them. I've mentioned today, sometimes I'm redirecting people towards other services, but knowing that I've got them to a place where they're going to get the help that they need now, I like it when I'm able to do that.
Well, that's the sign of a really, really good practitioner, is when you know that somebody else can intervene, and when it's time to refer somebody to somebody else. And it's great to have that network of professionals that you trust.
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
So Gemma, where can people find you? Can they contact you, find your podcast, your books, everything? Just lay it out for us.
So for the podcast and anything related to becoming a coach, you want to head on over to the People Building website. So that's peoplebuilding.co.uk. There is a page on there that's got all of the different podcast platforms that you can access the podcast on. There's a link to the book there. If you are interested in doing some study overseas, then all of our training takes place online anyway. So you don't physically have to be in the UK to be able to do any training with us. Equally with the franchise, it can all be done remotely. We've also got products that you can download, such as the hypnosis scripts and hypnosis audios that I mentioned. If anybody's got a specific ailment that they perhaps want to address, then take a look at the hypnosis audios there. So the People Building site is kind of all of the grown-up stuff. The other website that may be worth a look for people who are either working with or parents of children and young people is NLP for Kids. So that's NLP, November Lima Papa, and then a numerical 4, number 4, kids.org. And on that website, you'll find details about the practitioners that are already working with children and young people. Again, there's a whole blog page with articles, YouTube videos. We put out a couple of YouTube videos every month for NLP for Kids. There's also some really good downloads of webinars and things that we've done in the past around specific challenges that young people have, such as anger management, self-harming. So you can make some, really inexpensive one-off purchases of those training webinars to get a little bit of professional development around those as well. So there's some really good resources on that site. And we have a parents and professionals membership, which is again really inexpensive and gives you content every single month around different challenges that young people are experiencing with mental and emotional well-being.
Excellent. Gemma, this has been absolutely delightful having you on the show. I have loved listening to you. I think you are an amazing person. You are absolutely brilliant in some of your perspectives, some of the things you've done. Love your humor. Yeah, it's just been great. So thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It was a lovely chat. I really enjoyed it.
And everybody, thank you for listening. As always, I really appreciate you. And do go to Gemma's website, check out her books, check out her podcast. She is just an absolutely phenomenal human being. And I am hoping she will come back on the show down the road so we can catch up with her again and see what she is up to. And she's given us a lot of incredible tips, things to work on for our own, dare I say, personal growth and development. But remember, the big takeaway I got is that you are a wonderful, worthwhile person. Keep telling yourself that and don't forget it. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.